There's a number on a screen that never sleeps. It doesn't blink, it doesn't breathe, it just climbs. And if you've ever looked at the US debt clock, you know the feeling, like you're watching something alive, something that's grown too large to be controlled, too massive to be killed. At this scale, debt stops being a ledger entry, it becomes a presence in the room, a thing with momentum, a thing with hunger. Now here's the part nobody tells you. This story doesn't end with the US paying it off. It ends with the debt getting paid by erasing the value of the money you're paid in. The debt doesn't vanish, you do. Right now, the national debt is pushing past the mid-30 trillions and racing toward 38 trillion. That number is so big it breaks your brain on contact, which is convenient because a number you can't feel is a number you won't fight. For years, the public was tranquilized with the same lullabies. Don't worry, deficits don't matter. Don't worry, we owe it to ourselves. Don't worry, the economy will outgrow it. Those words worked like sedatives, and for a while the system could afford to keep the patient asleep. But then the math changed, and when the math changes, the story changes with it. The lullaby ends, the room gets colder, and you start to realize something is wrong, not because anyone told you, but because you feel it in the grocery store, at the gas pump, in the rent check that keeps getting bigger even though your paycheck doesn't. Here's the turning point: interest. Not the kind you earn in a savings account, the kind the government owes just to keep the machine running. At this stage, the debt isn't a problem, it's a mouth. And every year it demands a larger bite of the budget. You can ignore a big number. You can't ignore a bill that shows up every month, bigger than the last, forever. The terrifying part is what that bill forces next. The system starts borrowing to pay the interest on old borrowing. That's the spiral logic. New debt issued to service existing debt, which creates even more interest expense next year, which requires even more borrowing the year after that. It's a feedback loop. A predator that's learned to feed on itself, and once that loop begins, there's no conventional way to break it. When a country reaches this point, there are only a few exits. They're not mysterious. Empires have used the same doors for centuries. Door number 1, austerity. That means harsh spending cuts and punishing increases in what you pay. Political suicide in a country built on promises that can't be touched. Any leader who proposes slashing benefits commits career death. Any administration that tries to double what citizens owe gets voted out in a landslide. So door number 1 stays locked. Door number 2, open default. The government stands at a podium and admits it won't pay. For the issuer of the world's reserve currency, that's not a policy choice. It's a global detonation event. The entire financial system, every bank, every pension, every trade contract is built on the foundation that U.S. obligations are sacred. If that foundation cracks, the structure collapses, credit cards stop working, trade stops. It's not a recession, it's an extinction event. So door number 2 stays locked too. That leaves door number 3. The quiet door, the one that looks like repayment. You pay every cent. On time, no broken contracts, no dramatic default headlines, but the money you repay with is weaker than the money you borrowed. A soft default, paid in full, paid in paper, paid in shrinking purchasing power. This is the exorcism, not a crash, not a confession, a slow ritual where the debt doesn't disappear, it dissolves, and you dissolve with it. And if prices rise faster than the return paid to lenders, the real burden of the debt falls year after year without anyone voting to cut anything. The debt gets lighter, your savings get heavier. You carry what used to be theirs. And because it happens slowly, because it's dressed in the language of policy and necessity, most people don't notice until it's too late. By the time you realize you've been bled, the transfusion is complete. And if you think this sounds too clean, too engineered, good. It should, because this isn't new. After the Second Great War, the U.S. used a playbook that relied on keeping borrowing costs suppressed while prices ran hotter. Bondholders got paid, but the value of what they received quietly leaked away. It wasn't marketed as confiscation, it was marketed as recovery. Prosperity, the American dream reborn. And it worked, because the public didn't understand they were the ones funding the dream with their own future purchasing power. Today, the same strategy is back, but upgraded with modern instruments, tools designed to make the theft feel like weather. Inevitable, natural, beyond question. First comes the captive buyer. In a real market, a reckless borrower pays a higher rate, risk gets priced. But the U.S. can't afford real market rates at this debt level. So it manufactures demand. Through regulation, government obligations become mandatory holdings for banks and institutions, treated as high-quality assets, the kind you're required to keep to stay alive, not because they're always good, because the rules say they count. The system doesn't ask if you want to lend. It makes lending a condition of survival. You will buy, or you will not exist. Next comes the broken measuring stick, the official number people use to understand reality. If benefits, contracts, and index payouts are tied to that number, then lowering it saves money. So the formula changes. Substitution effects, quality adjustments, method tweaks that can make your lived experience feel like you're being told your own eyes are wrong. You know your rent doubled, you know your groceries cost more, but the official number says inflation is modest, manageable, under control. And because the official number is what gets reported, what gets taught, what gets cited, and every decision that affects your life, your reality, becomes a conspiracy theory. You become the unreliable narrator of your own poverty. Finally, the most important upgrade. The central bank stops being a shield for the currency and becomes a life support machine for the government's financing needs. In this world, raising rates the way they used to, the way they're supposed to when prices spiral, becomes impossible because higher rates make the government's interest bill explode. So the system tolerates more price increases than it admits. Because it has to. The independence everyone was promised is gone. The two entities, money printer and budget, are fused. And once they're fused, there's no separating them without killing the patient. Now we get to the part that makes this more than numbers. Because this quiet solution doesn't hit everyone equally. New money doesn't arrive like rain across a field, it enters through pipes. And whoever lives closest to the pipe gets clean water first. The early recipients of new money can buy land, stocks, buildings before prices rise. Everyone else gets the money later, after the costs of living have already adjusted upward. This is how you get a split reality, assets levitating while ordinary life feels heavier, a divided economy where the owners float and the workers sink. Wealth doesn't disappear, it migrates. It flows uphill to those who already have proximity to the system. And everyone else, the savers, the wage earners, the people who played by the old rules, they become the fuel. The exorcism doesn't erase the debt, it converts the public into collateral. In a normal world, playing it safe is responsible. Save cash, buy safe obligations, be patient. Wait. In a soft default world, that advice becomes a trap. Because if your savings earn less than real price increases, the system is using your patience as fuel. Your discipline becomes your liability. Your virtue becomes your sentence. This is how the exorcism works. It turns the public into the donor class without ever calling it a levy, without ever admitting what's happening. And it forces everyone into risk just to stand still. You're no longer saving for the future. You're gambling to survive the present. The system has turned the entire economy into a casino where you must place bets to avoid losing. Because the safe option, the responsible option, the one your parents taught you, is being deliberately destroyed. Not by accident, not by incompetence, by design. Because a population that can't save is a population that can't resist. A population that's forced to speculate is a population that's too exhausted to organize, too distracted to see the ritual happening around them. And just when you think the plan can't get more aggressive, the endgame appears. A fully programmable financial system where escape routes get sealed. A world where money can be controlled at the unit level, rates, restrictions, expiration, penalties, because the currency itself becomes software, ones and zeros that obey instructions. If the system decides you're saving too much, it can penalize the balance. If it decides you're not spending fast enough, it can put a timer on your funds. Spend it or lose it, obey or starve. This isn't science fiction. Versions of this system are already live in other nations. The technology exists. The legal frameworks are being drafted. The only question is timing. And the answer to that question depends on how desperate the system becomes, how fast the debt grows, how much control it needs to keep the illusion alive. But history shows something even darker. When the slow method isn't fast enough, governments don't always wait. Sometimes the ritual accelerates, sometimes the pretense of consent vanishes, and sometimes the system changes the rules overnight and simply takes the one asset that lets citizens protect themselves. The thing that holds value when paper doesn't, the thing that can't be printed, the thing that survived every collapse, every empire, every exorcism in human history. In 1933, America, the land of the free, did exactly that. The government criminalized private ownership of the one asset that allowed citizens to shield themselves from the erosion of currency. An executive order turned possession into a felony. 10 years in prison for holding wealth the state couldn't control. The legal justification was emergency. The real reason was survival. Not your survival, the system's survival. And the terrifying part isn't that it happened once, it's that the legal precedent still exists. The power is still on the books. The emergency authority that allows confiscation hasn't been repealed, it's been quietly broadened. Today, that same power can reach further. Not just metal in a vault, digital wallets, retirement accounts, anything the system decides is a threat to stability during a crisis. And in a world where the debt is climbing toward 40 trillion, 50 trillion, 60 trillion, where the exorcism needs to accelerate to stay ahead of the math, what counts as a crisis expands. You need to understand something. The $38 trillion isn't going away. It's going to keep climbing. But the value of the dollars you hold is going to keep shrinking. The government is betting it can dissolve the debt faster than the public can panic. It's a high-wire act. If the erosion happens too slowly, the debt crushes the system. If it happens too fast, trust collapses and the currency dies. So the system tries to thread the needle, inflation at 4 or 5, maybe 6% for a decade or more, not enough to cause riots, just enough to cut the value of everything in half by the mid-2030s. The debt gets lighter, you get poorer, and because it happens in slow motion, because it's wrapped in the language of recovery and necessity and economic resilience, most people won't connect the dots until it's finished. The winners in this system will be those who own things that can't be printed: land, businesses, hard assets, the things that survive when paper doesn't. The losers will be those who trust the currency and the institutions. Those who keep playing by the old rules in a game where the rules have been rewritten in invisible ink. The American dream of saving your way to security is dead. We're not in the age of building wealth anymore. We're in the age of defending it, of hiding it, of moving it before the exorcism reaches your door. This is not a collapse you'll see on the news. It's a slow bleed, a generational transfer, a quiet theft disguised as policy. And by the time the average person realizes what happened, the ritual will be complete. The debt will be lighter, the country will be poorer, and the people will be told they sacrificed for the greater good. But here's the final horror. Once the exorcism works, once the system realizes it can erase obligations without consequence, the technique doesn't go away. It becomes standard, permanent. The next crisis, the next emergency, the next time the numbers get too big, the ritual starts again and again and again, until there's nothing left to dissolve, until the currency is a shadow, until trust is a memory. And the scariest part, you won't hear about it in those terms. You'll hear about resilience, stimulus, quantitative support, necessary measures, modern monetary frameworks. The language will be clean, professional, calm, while the exorcism continues in silence, because the best way to take everything is to make it sound like nothing, to make theft sound like management, to make dissolution sound like policy. The debt isn't the monster. The debt is the excuse. The real monster is what comes next. The system that learns it can rewrite value with a keystroke, that can legislate reality, that can decide your money is worth less today than it was yesterday. And there's nothing you can do to stop it, because the tools are legal, the process is technical, and the victims are told they're being saved. This is the $38 trillion exorcism, not a crash, not a default, a dissolving. And it's happening now, in slow motion, in the gap between what you earn and what things cost, in the gap between what you're told and what you feel, in the gap between the promise and the payout. The debt will be erased. But you're the one paying for the ceremony. You're the offering, you're the fuel, and the ritual doesn't end until there's nothing left to burn.